Perfect. Crystal.
Good, good, good.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Sorry about the wait. There was just a little bit of a mix-up with the link, not the link, it wouldn't start. But now we got everything up and running. So we're just gonna wait as more people join. Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Athina Ramphal, and I am a sophomore at the New Explorations into Science, Technology, and Math in New York City. It's otherwise known as NEST+m. So today is the Genealogy Club's first flagship event, Our Idea, Gender, and Genealogy. So while we're waiting for people to join, it would be amazing to see how far our reach has gone. So if you can write where you're dialing in from in the chat, that'd be really cool to see. Wow, it looks like we went all over. This is great. Glad to see some Nest kids here. Oh, we have someone from Ireland. Wow. Wow, this is really cool to see. Thank you so much for participating in the chat.
Hitting all 50 states here, I think.
Sorry?
I said we're hitting all 50 states here, I think.
I know, this is crazy. We have Canada, that's crazy. Wow, this is really cool to see. Okay, so we're just gonna start in like a couple of minutes just to make sure everyone is all set with the link and stuff and everyone can join in. Okay, so I guess we'll begin. So welcome to the Genealogy Club's first flagship event, Our Idea, Gender, and Genealogy. We have two esteemed speakers, Dr. Brandon Ogbunu and Ms. CeCe Moore. Dr. Brandon Ogbunu is a professor of ecology and evolutionary biology at Yale University. CeCe Moore is an investigative genetic genealogist and media consultant. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions for the speakers during the presentations, please type them into the Q&A box or the chat. Sophia Kurashevsky, my co-founder, will be monitoring the chat box, and our advisor, Mr. Koss, will be monitoring the Q&A box. So I'll bring up questions from both forums after each presentation, and we will also have questions at the end of the webinar. Okay, so just as a formal introduction, so my name is Athina Ramphal, and I'm the founder of the Genealogy Club, and I founded this club along with my co-founder, Sophia Kurashevsky. Remember, she'll be monitoring the chat, so make sure you put all your questions in there. So our club's ethos is IDEA, which is an acronym for identity, diversity, exploration, and all-embracing. Okay, so just a little bit about how the Genealogy Club came to life at NEST. I attended a program back in 2017 called Finding Your Roots to Seedlings. It aimed to show how interested kids were in finding ways to answer the question, who am I? It was inspired by the popular PBS documentary series, Finding Your Roots with Professor Henry Louis Gates Jr. Just a heartfelt thank you to Professor Gates for building the foundation for the program and for carrying it out with Professor Nina Traflansky. Also, a special thank you to Tina Lasisi and Lindsay Fulton for introducing us to what you love about genealogy. Thank you to Christian Berg and his team for filming and editing all the 9 episodes. The links are in the chat right now, and it will be shared again at the end of the webinar. It really was an amazing program, and that is what we aim to mimic at our meetings by using their curriculum created by Elizabeth Wright. We did some really fun activities in person, and we have so many virtual fun activities planned because the Finding Youth curriculum was updated for virtual accommodations. And this is just a couple of pictures of what we did last year. We did a diversity map, which was really amazing to see and really eye-opening. And this is just a picture from Finding Your Roots as Seedlings. Okay, so before we start, I just want to show 2 introductory videos. So the first one is from Elizabeth Johnson with one of her accomplishments, in her case of unknown parentage.
Hi, I'm Liz Johnson. When I was 5 years old, I was adopted from an orphanage in Delhi, India, and brought to the United States. With Athina's genealogy experience at Finding Your Roots, the Seedlings program, I was able to connect to one of my few blood relatives who is Athina's grandfather.
Great. I just want to give a huge thank you to Elizabeth. So the second video is from Neela Chandradat with a 70-year-old secret that was revealed this year.
Unearthing a 70-year-old secret through Athina's interest in genealogy is truly shocking. My grandpa found out that he is the half-brother to Athina's grandma. A true story that shows how an unearthed secret can alter someone's identity. On the contrary, this discovery gave both sides explanations to questions they have had their entire lives.
Thank you so much. Now I just have another small survey for everyone. Have you seen any of the Finding Your Roots documentaries? If you haven't, check it out on PBS on Tuesdays at 8 p.m. EST. So make sure you write in the chat if you have. Glad some people have seen it. I know it's a really great show. Thank you so much for participating in the chat. Anyone have a favorite episode? So glad most people have watched the show. That's really cool. Okay, so now moving on to our presentations. And I'm sorry for the late start, by the way. It was just some mix up with the webinar not starting, but we have it all up and running now, so everything is a-okay. So now moving on to the presentations. Our first speaker is Dr. Brandon Ogbunu, known to me as the one and only Professor O. Dr. Ogbunu is an assistant professor at Yale University, where he teaches in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. Because of his clever approach in the Finding Your Roots of Seedlings program, he left a remarkable impact in shaping my future. Now, without further ado, I present to you Dr. Brandon Ogbunu with his talk, Our Central Dogmas, The Many Meanings of Me.
Wow. Can everyone hear me? Great. Just the first thing I have to say, and I'm going to say this often through my remarks, is just wow. Wow, wow, wow. I am so excited and thrilled to be here. It's Friday, and Friday's the day when you're supposed to do fun things, right? And in the age of COVID, we can't do some of the things we used to do, but this is better. This is about as good as it gets, okay? And I think for many, many reasons, this event excites me. First and foremost, I want to thank and acknowledge Athina, okay? I've now known Athina for, it's not a long time for me, but it's a good chunk of her life because she's young. And young people haven't lived very many years. So 2017, she was a bit of a different person. And to see kind of the way that she's taken this experience. But I think one of the things that us old people can do is we can look at a young person and you can kind of tell when there's something very special about them. And there's something special about everybody, but with her, you could see what the special thing was. I think from there it was very, very clear. And I want to congratulate her for what she's done. And I want to thank her for this privilege to be able to speak to you for my kind of Friday relaxation treat. That said, we're going to talk some science. We're going to talk a little bit of we're obviously going to talk about genealogy, but we're going to talk really firmly about the event, right? So it's, the event is called Gender and Genealogy. I think that's right. And so what am I doing on this event is a good question, right? I know you're wrong, I think, right? We want to make sure, right? What do I have to say about that issue in particular? We're going to cover that. We're going to cover the work that goes on in my laboratory. We're going to talk about my experience with finding your roots, the Seedlings, where I met Athina. And we're going to kind of tie these things together in some way. But I think the best part of any discussion, and I was talking to Athina about this earlier, is the actual exchange. So I'm going to leave kind of substantial time for us to be able to kind of have a back and forth and a dialogue so I can get questions from Athina, questions from this amazing audience that you've been able to accumulate. I mean, I just have to go back. I mean, when I was your age, I was in front of a video game all the time. I mean, I wasn't organizing successful events with scientists. I mean, this is impressive. So congratulations. So I've titled my talk, and we will not use slides, okay? We don't think we have to do that. Let's just, right, we will do that. Is that okay? Athina, you're the boss.
Would you like me to stop sharing?
Huh? No, we can leave it. We can just talk. Why don't we just have a conversation? Why don't we just do that? How about that?
Sure.
Yeah, why don't we just do that rather than having slides like I'm teaching. But the title of my talk, Our Central Dogmas, the Many Meanings of Me. And I think this is one of the things that, that I preach and teach kind of in my science. Now, I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. I'm a geneticist. I actually have a laboratory with students who are performing experiments and mathematical models, and I kind of come up with statistical ways to identify how genes are changing and why they're changing. And in particular, I'm interested in disease genes, things that are associated with disease. How do they get that way? Drug resistance and resistance to certain antimicrobial drugs. How did they get that way? You know, so this is the work that I do in the laboratory. And I think many of you know, and I think I'm not going to do the thing where the teacher quizzes you in the middle of the class. I'm not going to do that, Athina, because you're so smart. Anyway, but many of you might have heard of this concept called the central dogma of molecular biology. The central dogma of molecular biology. Okay, if anybody knows what it is, you can put it in the comments. Basically, what it is, it's a diagram and it's a model. It's a thought diagram for the way information flows in biology. So it starts as we thought about it with DNA, right? DNA, the RNA, the protein, right? And so that's this flow of information. You have DNA encoded and stored in this kind of long-term storage molecule called DNA. RNA is kind of the instrument that we use to basically, it gets transcribed into RNA and then RNA to protein. I think that's kind of was the classical model through which we thought kind of how life happened, okay? And the interesting thing about the central dogma of molecular biology is that a lot of modern science, a whole lot of modern science has been about adding details to it, adding things. It's not quite that simple. I think really with any field, a lot of things are, you have a simple picture, like the universe. Maybe some of you are interested in physics, okay? As you know, the universe, the kind of what happens and why it's happened. And that's why relativity is such a big deal, because it changed our picture of the universe. And that's what makes science great. We learn these new details and it changes things. Well, it turns out like we used to think that the universe worked by the biological universe, the biosphere. We used to think that that used to work where you had DNA, and from the DNA alone, I could tell everything about an organism. That's what we used to think. I just look at the sequence of letters, right? And of course, we thought that way for good reason, right? We know about, some of you know about Gregor Mendel, who did these really, really cool experiments in a garden on plants. And from this was able to come up with these really important and cool rules for the way genetics works, these basic rules of inheritance. And they worked really well in that system. The challenge for the field of genetics and understanding who we are is that it's not that simple. Who you are is a lot more complicated, okay? Now, here's the thing. It's not only Gregor Mendel that had it wrong. There's a lot of smart, fancy people, even today, that have it wrong, okay? Right? Because, listen, genes are extremely, again, that's how I pay the bills, because the genes are very, very important. But what we've learned in science is that there's all these other things that inform who you are, okay? And I think we have a technical term for that in science, right? I think, one of the, everything in science what we do is anytime we don't understand something, we come up with a technical way to describe it. One of the ways we describe it is this term, a gene by environment interaction. What does that mean? That means, right? That means that
I see Athina. Athina seems to be doing pretty well right now, smiling, right? She is smiling because I hope she's happy with my presentation, and because her life's going pretty well right now. I don't know if Athina's a morning person or not a morning person. There's a different time of day you're gonna get. Which one? Not a morning person? Okay, well, okay, that's very, very high school of you. She's not smiling that way at 5 a.m. If you woke up at 5 a.m., you're not smiling that way. You're not happy that way because who you are is contingent upon the environment you're in. Sometimes early in the day, you're not happy. Anybody get cranky when they haven't eaten? You know, oh, whoa, okay. Who you are as an organism is contingent upon, right, the environment that you're in. And so we've kind of done a myriad experiments to examine this. Okay, so for example, we have fruit flies. There's like bristles on a fruit fly. Drosophila is this fruit fly that we use to kind of understand a lot of things about genetics. You show that if you actually if a fruit fly grows and develops, right, from early on at different temperatures, it leads to a different number of bristles. So what an organism becomes is really, really, really sensitive to an environment that they're in, right? Right. And so this dimension of what an environment is ends up being critical to understanding who we are. Right? And that doesn't mean one thing's better than the other. It means it's a gene by environment. I mean, these things they depend on each other, so to speak. Who you are as an organism is really contingent upon these two things. Now, what are some examples of environments? I just gave you one. This fruit fly growing at hot temperature is different than a fruit fly growing at low temperature. That one, I think that one makes sense. Or, isn't that one, you understand temperature. Everybody understands what it means to be hot. I could use some heat right now. I don't know about you, but whatever. Okay. But there's other things that influence who we are. Are some of you, hot weather people, some of us cold weather people, we perform, we're happier in certain temperatures. But there's also environments that are deeper. For example, where do you live? And not just like where you live in terms of your home and your actual address. What is the community that you live in? Who do you live around? In your neighborhood, what do you have access to? Right? Do you grow up in a school system where you have excellent teachers like Mr. Coates? Or do you have people like me who just shout for all day? Okay, right? So I think this is right. This is going to influence why getting it right. We want people to go to good schools because the environment you're in dictates what you end up being. Okay. The reason why I was so happy to have Athina in Finding Your Roots to Seedlings and Finding Your Roots to Seedlings did a lot of things because it matters the environment that you're in. Okay. And I don't actually know the story about how Athina found out about Finding Your Roots to Seedlings, but there was probably, and this is where it gets serious, there was probably another smart young person like Athina who didn't have that opportunity. Okay, didn't apply. Okay, just like me, there's another opportunity. There's another version of me who wasn't raised what I was raised with, and didn't have access to that, and wasn't able to go on into school and be a professor, right? And maybe that's their choice. But the point is, we should think about this when we think about all the forces that make me who I am. Okay. Now, it gets even more interesting. And this is the reason why I teach this way is because it makes the genetics that I study more interesting and fun. So it's not about where I live. It's also, right? So some people think that there's genetics and science, there's STEMs, math, and then there's there's the humanities side, and you got to read literature, and you got to read social studies and history. I don't want to read that. Or so you know how the world puts you in one of those boxes. That's wrong. And I think, thankfully, Finding Your Roots is a project where it's brought those things together beautifully, right? Because one of the things about who you are, and one of the amazing things about Finding Your Roots to show is specifically that it shows you where you come from, and not where you come from, but where the people before you came from, okay? And so Finding Your Roots to Seedlings was this awesome experience for all of us because we got to kind of really, really crack that question open. Who am I? Dr. Elizabeth Wright, who designed the curriculum, okay, really deconstructed it in this really elegant way that I've since I thought is a useful way, right? The genetic self, the genealogical self, and the intentional self. That was a really smart way of thinking about it, right? And today we're going to focus on this genealogical self, right? Now, genetic self, I think we know. Most stuff that, the intentional self is like things that you decide to do. I decided to wake up today and have a coffee and decided to come and shout at everybody for, the amount of time that I'm shouting at them for. But that's intentional. But genealogical, just like genetic, here's what's interesting about those two pieces of information. I don't have control of them. I got no control over who I was born into. I don't control the body I was born into. I don't have control of what my parents are, right? And what's beautiful about life, and we saw this in one of the videos we just saw, is that the genetic and genealogical are often related, but they're not the same. Who your genetic ancestors are often the people who your genealogical ancestors, but not necessarily. In the conversation, you asked the question of what episode did you like? Right, the LL Cool J one, I posted LL. That was magnificent. Okay, everybody watch that one if you haven't seen it, right? The LL Cool J one, he found out that somebody extremely close to him, that was an important part of his genealogy, he actually isn't genetically related to. It's powerful, but he found that out on the show. It was incredible. It was incredible. It was beautiful. One of the most, right? And this is somebody I've admired for a long time as an artist, right? So my point is that's what makes that great. Now, what do I do as a molecular scientist? Because again, I deal with long division and microbes, and I grow things in a test tube and all that. And I think, hopefully, like I said, hopefully Athena will come and do that in my lab one day, right? But I try to think carefully, and a lot of the work that I do is about connecting these things. And so I do a lot of things like finding your roots, the seedlings, because I'm interested in the human experience. I'm interested in how the interhuman experience interacts with science, right? I tell stories about my experience as a scientist. And in doing that, I try to talk very carefully, right, and intelligently about what an environment really, really is. What are some other things about the environment? I talked about history. Do you think we just woke up one day and everyone lived where they lived in America? No. Where people live in America and the food we eat and the things we believe is the product of a process. Some of these things were the product of decisions that were not nice, to put it mildly, right? And I think, right, I think my mother tells me this story, okay, about when she was a little girl. She was born and raised in Baltimore. She was born, but we trace our ancestry, our genealogy and genetic ancestors to North Carolina, to some descendants of African-American slaves raised in North Carolina, to the Carolinas. Also, we think South Carolina. We're still figuring out, but at least North Carolina. When she would go visit relatives in North Carolina as a little girl, young girl, she would go, get on the bus and hop on the front of the bus. And her family would say, no, Fanny, you can't sit there. You got to move them back. Now, as a little girl, you know how when you're a little kid and like, Athena, you're not like really a little kid, but you're enough of a little kid that you know that grown-ups have dumb rules. Like grown-ups just have dumb rules. So at that point, she was like, all right, whatever. Grown-ups are dumb. Who cares? And boy, was she right. Because she couldn't sit in that spot on the bus because of Jim Crow. Because of the color of her skin. Now, when you think about that type of history, do you think that influences the way this organism called a Homo sapien lives today? Oh, you bet. Right? And so that's an important dimension. And I think that's the beautiful thing that Dr. Henry Louis Gates has been able to, to kind of make very, very clear. It's one of the reasons why he got interested in this. And this is one of the things I try to bring out in my writing, okay? And I write. So I write for a lot of places. I write for Wired magazine. And I write at the intersection, right, where I try to dig in and explore these concepts. I'll be writing a book soon about this, believe it or not. So yeah, so I try to be a scientist, a biological scientist, an evolutionary geneticist who also does mathematical modeling of epidemics. I've done stuff with COVID as well, right? So my research really, really tries to get after all of these cutting edge biological phenomenon, but I try to do it in a manner that makes me, that is sensitive to understanding the way the things that I study are influenced by the world that we live in. And when I think about the environment itself, and this is the one where we tie into gender, okay? And specifically, right? Because when we think about the lack of gender diversity in all these fields, in science, in genealogy, in any of these fields, that's when I take a special Okay. Did I lose you? Okay. You here? We here?
Lost you for a minute, but you're back
Okay,
now. We can hear you.
Good.
Yep.
Right. My mother, who I introduced you to already, okay, she would have been a better scientist than I would have been if she had had the opportunities that I've had. Smart, creative. She's like a better version of me. Funnier, cooler, wittier, was a Trekkie. Okay? Was a Trekkie, was everything, right? Hilarious, but brilliant. Taught me math. No way she would not have been a better. And so my career is dedicated to creating opportunities for people like my mother. Let me find that talent and let me give that the opportunity to flourish. My first genetics teacher was Susan Gottesman, a scientist at the National Institutes of Health. You might have heard me talk about her in Radiolab and the Story Collider. Genius. Flat out genius. That's why I had never taken a genetics course or anything before I met her. And now I'm doing microbial genetics of my own. Boom. So even my scientific story is a genealogy of itself, right? I'm influenced by people who influence me. My first PhD student, and she's in my lab now, my first PhD student in my lab now, Lourdes Gomez. Brilliant, from California. So I think women have been a very central part of my identity, framing my identity as a person and as a scientist. And it is my imperative to make sure that we knock down those barriers so that people like my mother in a prior generation and Athena in this generation could do whatever they want, okay? Right. I'll stop there, and there's like all kind of like people are arguing in the comments. This is great. We can, I'm kidding, but like we can have any kind of conversation you want to have. How does that sound, Athena? Did I do an okay job? Okay, I hope so, because
it was really great. Okay, so I'm just going to reshare my screen real quick, and so we're going to move on to questions. Okay, so any question that you have, you could pop it in the chat or the Q&A box. I already see 2 in the Q&A. Okay, so the first one in the Q&A is, how far are we from altering human genetic code for favorable traits? And do you think this will be more of a legal issue or an ethical issue?
Woo. Starting out nice and easy, huh? I appreciate it.
Nice low ball.
So we already have the technology. It's been done already. So modifying human embryos has already happened. So the technology is here. So we are dealing with this now. Okay. It's here to stay as a technology, right? Now, you said something very interesting in there. Is favorable traits. That's where the conversation starts to get dicey. Number one. And number two, the legal versus ethical, which I think is related. So let's talk about the favorable traits. What do you mean? Right? Now, of course, I want to have children that are 7 feet tall so they can go to the NBA and make me some money so I can retire. That's what I want. Okay. So, but I think, so that one, there's some things that are kind of like clear. Okay, maybe you want really tall people, whatever. Those are like morphological traits, structural traits. Those are kind of a little bit, they're not easy to, they're a little easier to understand genetically. The problem comes in when you talk about favorable things that are not that clear. So for example, when we talk about somebody being right, do I think that some people might be born with some things that kind of allow them, understand, to learn languages easier, for example? Maybe. But like I just told you, that person that can learn languages easier, if they're born in a certain place where they don't have access to the education, it's not gonna matter. I don't care, right? I'm a professor. My mother was a high school teacher. Do you really think the difference between me and her is something in our genes that can be modified in an embryo? No. One of us grew up poor in Baltimore. One of us grew up in New York. So unless you understand how that difference leads to the difference between me and my mother, we're gonna have a hard time knowing what to change. You're gonna compare me and my mother and say, oh, well, Brandon has these mutations. That's how he's able to be a Yale professor. No, it's because of them, right? I was raised by an extraordinary person in an extraordinary context who taught me extraordinary things. And so unless you can disentangle that, I wouldn't even know where to start when it comes to favorable traits for most things. It gets even worse than that. Let's just say we're in the Jim Crow South. If you looked at that part of the town where my mother's relatives were from in North Carolina, right? It was segregated. Which part of town you think had better water and better schools and better everything? That's right. So what I'm saying is, if I'm a parent at that point and I'm like, I want to engineer my kids to have favorable traits that's going to lead to a better outcome, you're going to associate that with not looking a certain way. And that has nothing to do with genes. That has to do with the decisions we've made about how we treat each other. Okay, and so this issue really permeates into kind of what a favorable trait is. Now, some things are unambiguous. Disease risk. That one's cool. There are some genes in the disease that are associated with like higher disease, but even that's tricky. I think the disease risk genes are complicated. They're not like, it's not that simple. There's very few diseases where it's like one gene or two genes. Most of it's very, very complicated. And even that is associated with environment. So my point is the favorable aspect of that is complicated, which leads to the ethical part. Okay, right, those are connected. Because unless you can tell me for absolute sure that this mutation is going to do this thing for sure, and it's not going to cause any harm, that's another thing. There's a scientific question here. You change one part of a genome, how do I know that's not going to interact with another part of the genome? This is a phenomenon called epistasis that I study, right? Where you have interactions between genes. How do I know you're not going to get something surprised? To the point, there's a lot of scientific work that has to be done. And I think because of the science problem, there's going to be ethical problems. And I think hopefully the legal side of it can get out in front of it so that we're not playing catch up to the technology. We want to be in front of the technology, or at least with the technology, which is hard because there's a lot of smart people work on it. So great question. I'll stop blabbing about that because there's a lot of other cool questions, but great question.
Okay, so great question. Yes, I do agree. All right, so we have another question in the Q&A. It says, is this what epigenetics is? The environment affecting genes? And then she mentions how she is an adoptee, and she can definitely attest to the environment affecting who she is.
Great question. So epigenetics is different. Epigenetics is different. What epigenetics says is that the environment directly changes how the DNA functions, right? So there's a process called methylation, right? Basically, the body can do these things where if it's under stress or something can happen, it can turn off certain genes and it can stick these kind of like locks on the DNA so that so the certain genes can't be turned on and turned off. And in certain environments, we see that happen. We see basically the body just shutting down whole portions of the genome such that you can or can't make the protein that's associated with it. That's different. That's very direct. The thing about the environment by gene interactions is the DNA is the same. Let's just say you have me and you have me and my mother's generation. Okay? Same person, right? And I probably have an afro then or something, right? I'm probably cool. You know how people dressed back then, like they were cool and they were like, hey, jive turkey, or whatever they used to say back then. So you have a version of me back then, okay? Yeah, you got jive turkey, Brandon, and I'm a New Yorker. Athina will appreciate this. What's up, yo, Brandon? You got two Brandons, okay? Same DNA. Let's just say I have a great gene. Let's just say this is science fiction. I have a gene associated with making me real great at basketball. I don't have that one, but let's just say I did, okay? Let's just say I had it. I had leaping ability. Here's the thing. If my middle school or high school doesn't offer basketball, I'm not going to even know that those genes are meaningful. You need to have a certain environment in place for the genes to do what they do. So even if I do have a gene for being really, really good at math, I have to have a math class. if there's no math class for this great math gene to do its job in, or I grew up in an environment where people tell me I'm worthless, I'm less than human, or that I'm not valued, or you're in a country like we have in the world, like, you know, where girls can't go to school, those environments, it doesn't matter how smart you are in those places, you cannot go to school. So what I'm saying is the environment in that way, that's not changing the DNA. DNA is still the DNA. It's the same old DNA. The DNA can't actually, whatever its proclivities, whatever its propensities, it can't play out because it's in an environment. If you have a propensity, so for example, I think I looked at my genetic risk. My genetic risk, it says, you know, there's some elevated risk for type 2 diabetes. Okay, I got right. But here's the question. Do you think I eat the same as a version of me in my mother's generation? Now I eat gluten-free, vegan sausage stew. Yes, oh no, is that free-ranging meat? That wasn't the case for the version of me 25 years ago and 30 years ago and 40 years ago and 100 years ago. They had to eat what they had to eat because they were poor. So do you think that person is gonna have the same disease outcomes as I will? No. Where you are and what you grow up in and what the context is dictates what the phenotype ends up being. And that's what I mean by the environment, because the DNA doesn't change. Epigenetics is more when the environment is actively changing the DNA. And that's actually rare, even though it's a cool, creepy, mysterious concept, but it's different than basic gene by environment interactions. Great questions.
Okay, so really, really great question. So there's another question in the Q&A. It says, I've heard others claim that environmental trauma is in an ancestor's past can imprint their DNA and be passed down passed down in the genes. In your professional opinion, is that a valid statement in any way?
Well, I think we have evidence of this from other organisms, that you have generational, so epigenetics, where you have a trauma. So this is one of the interesting things. So things like starvation, there were studies in mice, and there's been studies in C. elegans, which is a worm, where you had like a traumatic event that actually did epigenetically change the DNA, meaning it changed the patterns of the way the the genes are expressed. And they found those same patterns in grandchildren. So the notion is that you can pass down some of these things. Because of that, that has to be a plausible mechanism for things to happen. Now, you have to be careful to walk that directly into Homo sapiens. Okay, is there strong evidence right now that that's like a clear thing that happens in Homo sapiens? No. Is there a clear signal that that's responsible for like transgenerate some of the issues that like colonized populations have? I don't see the clear signal. I think that's an open area of research, but I don't see that as a clear explanation or a clear signal for that with regards to transgenerational trauma. I think transgenerational trauma is a problem because of the world that it builds. I don't need DNA to explain why we have trauma lasting generations. People have it for, so that's where I land there. But also great question.
Really great question. I agree. Okay. So we have one question. One thing that is rapidly changing in our environment is technology. How does this affect our genetics, and how does this affect our genetics?
Whoa! I mean, this is great. This is amazing. This is why I love sci-fi. You know what I'm saying? Because Mandalorian, anybody? Whatever. Hey, sci-fi is awesome because think about what a smartwatch is. That's sci-fi in the past. You now have an appendage that can basically compute all these things about who you are and what your life is and how you live and what you're breathing and where you've been. And I mean, it's really like a robot arm. You know what I'm saying? And so with the technology now of being able to monitor who we are, monitor our wellness, I can now say, oh, I haven't taken my steps today. So one is the way technology has kind of worked into our daily lives. It's changed everything about kind of who we are. And I think technology's changed. I think our understanding of technology and nanotechnology is going to influence the way we take drugs, the way we discover drugs. Like I said, the genetic thing is going to be really, really helpful because it can help us identify certain kind of genes that are associated with these. help us come up with smarter and more particular drugs. We can learn things like why aspirin doesn't work the same in every person, which is important. We can learn these really, really important things. So I think technology is going to make these things, is going to dramatically change. I mean, you know, I think one of the great moments, I mean, you see these kind of, you know, I love to watch the Special Olympics for that reason, or the Paralympians, excuse me. You know what I'm saying? I love watching the Paralympians because that to me is a demonstration of how we are as a society and how we live, and technology and things changes what's possible, right? And so you have individuals now who are able to walk now who could not walk because of technology. They're able to participate. I saw an individual the other day. I mean, you know, and I think that it's very, very beautiful. So what I'm saying is technology continues. It's it's an example of an environment. It's the environment adding something or changing something that makes more things possible. You know, I mean, I look at the sprinters now who can run, right, without legs. I mean, that's amazing, right? And it's all because of technology.
It also seems like we have more and more data too to base it off of, and like the world of people getting involved in this science is opening up such that we have things like 23andMe where we can start to extract even greater meaning from having millions of people participating, you know, or even movies like Limitless where people are learning about gene therapy and how it might look, you know, somewhere far off in the future. It's amazing.
It really, really is. I want to give a hello to Dr. Graves. He's in the comments. He's a legend in this field. So I want to make sure I acknowledge him quickly.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. Okay, we have one other question. How can we inform and educate the lay public about epigenetics as it pertains to major social determinants behind racial and ethnic health disparities, especially in this time period when people are finally waking up to the reality of structural racism and its impact on health?
Well, I think let's unpack that a little bit. I think that epigenetics is different. So let's peel that apart. I think that's the thing. I think epigenetics, I think a lot of us, self included, got really excited about the epigenetics phenomenon because the idea is maybe that's explaining a lot of the health problems we're finding now, right? Maybe because this population has had transgenerational trauma, they were things that altered the DNA itself that explain why we have these differential effects of COVID and whatever. But like I just told you, epigenetics is the direct effect of the environment in changing the DNA. I can explain a lot of the problems that we've had with kind of disparities and inequalities without epigenetics. For example, let's talk about COVID, right? We see these differential kind of rates of disease burden in different populations, okay? And we're still disentangling what that is. A lot of people ran to try to identify, I think they ran to identify a genetic marker associated with like disease severity, right? And they located one, I think it was on chromosome 2 or 3, I think it was 2. All right, they located a marker on chromosome 2 or 3. And of course, they identified that that marker is associated with Neanderthal ancestry. Okay, Neanderthal ancestry. Neanderthal ancestry is actually underrepresented in African American populations who actually had a higher disease burden. So that's not the explanation. That's not the explanation. There's almost certainly not the genetic reason for that. So what would explain something like that? Does it need to be epigenetics? Is it that the environment and institutionalized racism and structural violence has changed the DNA? It doesn't have to be. We learned a couple things. We have a lot of data on the way different patients are treated in the hospital. There was a study out of University of Virginia Medical School from years ago. It's one of the saddest studies I've ever read, where they talked about, they compared Black patients and white patients, and they actually, like, medical students graded Black patients as having a higher pain tolerance. Well, that's unbelievable. I mean, it's believable, but it's unbelievable. The notion is people do not treat everyone the same in the hospital. So that's number one. And if people are not treating everybody the same in the hospital, I don't need to change the DNA to explain the problem. The problem is how we're treating each other. Okay, number one. Number two, where people are going to the hospital. Do you think that, right? Even, right, you know, there's a lot of different hospitals. Some parts of town have a level of care that other parts of town do not. That can influence it. And there's signals for there's signals that there were different COVID-19 serious disease risks based on where he went in New York. There's actually data on that. Okay. A friend of mine is a physician on the front line there. a colleague of mine. So what I'm saying is, how do we educate? I think we just need to continue to read history, learn the way society is structured. History has been very empowering for me, and policy is very empowering for me. Because, right, when you think about things like, are there genes for criminality? Are there genes that might kind of lead some people that, you know, act a different way or maybe not obey the rules? Maybe. But I can't even think about that because of the way criminality is characterized in the United States. It's not fair. Person A does this thing that's worse and they get no punishment. Person B does a little thing and they get criminalized their whole life. It's like, there's no way I can actually ever think about the genes in that context. So what I'm saying is, as long as we're thinking about policy and thinking about history, that gives me everything that I need. I don't even need epigenetics to get after that question. Athena, you're starting to frown at me. Am I talking too much?
No.
I'm kidding. Listen, you're the boss.
No, your answers are really, really great. And the questions are really, really great too. Okay, so just a question from Christianberg, who is the producer for Finding Your Roots, the Seedlings. He wanted to ask a question for teachers, so maybe you can answer in the chat. How did your team in the Finding Your Roots camp navigate conceptions of race versus ancestry? Both are so important for one's identity, but seem to be frequently confounded.
We'll talk about, gender, and it's because I had several of the brightest women on earth, people on earth who happen to be women. Okay, so Nina Jablonski, one of the best anthropologists ever, flat out, okay, has written about this. Has written about this. Elizabeth Wright, who designed the curriculum around this. I'll answer the question. I'm just going to say that's really the answer. The answer is I work with great people. My environment was great. See how we do it? See the thing? And then Tina Lasisi, who's, mini Nina Jablonski. Okay, she's baby Nina Jablonski. She's the next, is incredible, brilliant, genius. And I think they all, together we have, and a lot of this work has been done by Dr. Graves. Dr. Graves wrote one of the best books ever written about race, scientific race, Dr. Graves, right? So The Emperor's New Clothes is the name of it. So my point is, I think you can disentangle very easily that there is no meaningful scientific information by genetic information meaningful that I get from a race, right? I think there's geography. I think geographical ancestry can be useful. I think as populations have a geographical ancestry, that's useful. But I think the notion that we try to fit into these kind of incorrigible and hard boxes, that's not true, right? And I think that goes for a lot of things. The analogy I always use is, I'm a New Yorker. Athena, I don't know if you're a baseball fan. Mr. Coach, I don't know if you're a baseball fan. A little bit. Yankees over here. Yankees. Right?
Yeah, we got some Yankees fans.
Good. That's my guy. I knew that. I could tell you have class and dignity and excellence. Okay, my point is this. There's a lot of things, right? That's a meaningful category to me, because I don't want to have a beer with a Red Sox fan. I don't want to. I don't even want them in my class if I had it up to me. My point is, I don't want to work with them. I don't want to be friends with them. The point is, so that's a meaningful category in terms of my social life. A lot of my friends are Yankee fans. I'm proud of my Yankee fan legacy. I'm proud of my Yankee fan culture, but there's no biological difference. That's silly. So the difference is, so for example, I'm an African-American man. I'm a Black man. I'm very proud to be one. Very proud of my culture. I'm very proud of my heritage. I'm very proud of who I am, and I will always be that way. That's a meaningful characteristic because it dictates, and it's a meaningful characteristic because of what it's meant through history. But the notion that is some kind of hardened box, right? I mean, the notion that there's things that me and Dr. Graves and me and Professor Henry Louis Gates that we're all the same. There's just no basis for it. So we try to kind of preach that kind of lesson in the course, and I think, and we need to continue to do so.
Great answer. Thank you so much for answering. Okay, so just a couple more questions. So what message would you give to youth that are interested in genealogy?
I mean, you tell me, Athena. Follow Athena. Let me tell you, no. Meaning in the sense of, I think what Athena has done, and I think since she was young, I remember she was little, and curious, asked questions, did the research on her own, Googled things, looked things up, contacted professors. When I ignored the emails, not because I didn't ignore them, I just didn't answer them because that's what old people do. We don't answer email. Athina understood that and was persistent, right? Contacting people, staying in touch. But there's so many good materials out there on your own. So for example, the best information is watch the episodes. Watch them all and study them. Because they're amazing. It's like really is an amazing show. I'm like, no bias. It's really, really an incredible show. And the stories and the way we're able to watch that, get familiar with the methods. Now, I think scientifically and whatever, there's different skills you can use. And I think me and the next speaker, who's a superstar, I guess I'm just a warm-up act. I'm just like, I have the first act. I'm opening for Athina and for CeCe Moore. That's what I'm doing. Like you get the intro comedian and people are like, okay, bring out Chris Rock. I don't want to see you. But whatever. The point is, learn the skills. Learn the skills. In my case, it's genetics, right? So math is the big one. Statistics, those are the big ones. Those are the big ones that people are afraid of. And I think the earlier you can get some comfort with, you don't gotta be Archimedes. I'm just saying, get some comfort with math, right? Math and physics and these kind of things like that. So I like quantitative stuff early. Go to college, you can major in biology. There's a lot of different biology majors now. Learn the genetics stuff. I think genealogy is much more interesting skill-wise because this feels like archivists. This feels like doing research. This feels like being a historian. I think historian is a very, very deep kind of, Henry Louis Gates kind of, right, as his field. So the point is, that's one of the fun things about genealogy is there's a lot of entryways into thinking about doing this type of research. But I think figuring out kind of what side of the problem you want to address will help you kind of think about what skills. But I think from my side, it's definitely more, I think the more you can learn a little bit more math and STEM and get comfortable with it, I think the better. And obviously learning biology. I think history and doing archival research, digging into things, learning that skill, that's definitely more in the history.
Great answer. And definitely check out the Finding Your Seedlings program. It's the best. It's just so amazing to see. Okay, coming from a minority background, what challenges did you face and how would you advise high schoolers to navigate these challenges? Great
question. And I think this is a complicated one, but I'll give you a good answer. Well, look, I think science and being a professor, it's like, here's the thing. It's just like anything else. I don't care if you're going to be a football coach or you want to be a physicist, right? You live in the world, and the world doesn't treat everybody the same way, okay? So I'll give you the bad news first. That's the bad news. Doesn't treat everybody the same way, okay? One of the things I watch is, you ever see Hidden Figures? Everybody need to see that. Talk about gene by environment. All this woman wanted to do was do her job. And she had to look at the environment she was in. I wouldn't have been able to do that. So what I'm saying is, this is the world we live in. We don't live in her world, right? And we live in a world much different than that one. But what I'm saying is, that's the reality. People are gonna, there's different standards. There's gonna be certain things I can't get away with. I see people getting away with things in my job I'd have never been able to get away with. Okay, and that's just the reality. That said, I think when you're talking to young people, it's also important for me to not tell them that the world is a horrible place and that they shouldn't bother. You're right? No. A lot of people, like Professor Henry Louis Gates, like Professor Joseph Graves, like Professor Nina Jablonski, have broken down barriers. And so it is way easier, right? Look at this right now. Look at this conversation between me and Athina. Could that have happened 25 years ago? No. And that's because people broke down barriers. So what I'm saying is acknowledge that you have way more opportunity. And that's why I can't, again, I look at my mother. I'm like, I got way more opportunity. It's way easier for me to do things than her. And so let me continue to push and open more doors so that smarter people, better versions of me like Athina, can come through the door and do the next thing. And I think as long as we keep that attitude of, world's gonna be an imperfect place. Y'all see the country? Come on, let's keep it real. Okay, you know what I'm saying? This is family, right? All right, it's people with distorted views out here. We're gonna have to deal with that, and that happens in our profession. But as long as we keep kicking the door down, opening it up, we make it easier for the next generation. So that's what I would say.
Great answer. Thank you so much for answering the question. Also, what inspired you to go in your field?
Yeah, I mean, it started with my mother. So my mother was interested in science. She went about as far as women went in that generation. And I think she was a teacher. She was a single mother and she was a teacher. And she taught math and social stuff. I'm basically a carbon copy of her, like in every conceivable way. Like, you know, like I got just less cool and less smart and less funny. And I think she would have been a scientist. I had a love of science and math from early. I love sci-fi from early. I think I think the dimension though that's important, I think I can leave you with is I'm a child of, we're all children of the time we were raised in. So I see a lot of young people in college now that really care about climate change, for example. And this call, genealogy is going to be it. I think COVID will lead to a generation of young people that are interested in disease. For me, it was HIV. HIV was the thing that really changed my imagination. And that's how I got interested in disease, in microbes, in evolution. And I said, we got to figure out something to do about this. And to this day, I study viruses, to this day. Right? So I think some points, an interaction between, right, common theme, my mother and that influence, and then the time I was in and seeing the things that were affecting people around me. And that kind of is what would pique my interest there.
Okay, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation and for answering all those questions. Is there anything you would like to add before we wrap up?
No, like I said, I'm the opening act. I see a CeCe Moore on my screen, so I'm gonna grab my popcorn. That's what I'm gonna do.
All right, cool. Okay, so I'm just gonna reshare my screen, and I guess we're just gonna continue. Okay, so for those of us just joining, welcome to the Genealogy Club's first flagship event, Our Idea, Gender, and Genealogy, hosted by the Genealogy Club at NEST+m in New York City. So, just another quick survey for everyone. Have you watched any of the episodes of The Genetic Detective? If you haven't, make sure to check it out on ABC's website. Whoops. Looks like a lot of people have watched the show and loved it. Someone watched the whole season twice. So your show is a big hit, Ms. Moore.
Glad to hear it.
All right, okay. So our second and final speaker is Ms. CeCe Moore. Ms. CeCe Moore is a world-renowned genetic detective. She uses genealogy to catch criminals by building their family trees down from the genetic networks that the DNA at the crime scene matched to. I guess you could say she's one of my genealogy idols. I could ramble on forever about the amazing work she does, but I'll leave that to Ms. Moore with her talk, The Power of Genealogy. Take it away, Ms. Moore.
Hello, I hope everyone's been enjoying the event so far. I'm sure it has been wonderful and I'm so happy to be joining. So I need to share my slides here. So let's share my screen. It says you need to enable it.
I just enabled it. I think you should be.
Okay. Are you able to see the PowerPoint?
Yep, I can see it.
All right. Well, the greatest history book ever written is the one hidden in our DNA. Dr. Spencer Wells of the National Geographic Project said this, and I absolutely believe it to be true. And I have felt this way for a long time, even before I got seriously involved in genetic genealogy. Once I did get involved, I often used this slide and talked about this in my presentations, that DNA has virtually unlimited potential for discovery. And I would always end my talks with, what will you discover? But that was early on. And even I couldn't have imagined what I would discover in my own life and experience, and what so many people that I worked with would discover about themselves, about their family history, and about their identities. But becoming a professional genetic genealogist was not a clear path. at the time that I started over a decade ago, there was no such thing as a professional genetic genealogist. We were all hobbyists and passionate about what we did, but it was not an occupation where you could make your living at it. You had to have another job and then do this as a hobby. Now, fortunately, I was in a position where I could start working full-time in genetic genealogy, even when it was just a volunteer avocation, before I was really making a career and making money from it. I was the first one to call myself a professional genetic genealogist. And in order to do that, I had to brave my own trail because there was nobody who had gone before me that I could follow to figure out how to do this. It started with my blog. So when 23andMe introduced the first autosomal DNA testing for genealogy at the end of 2009, I fell madly in love with this idea and the potential for genetic genealogy. And so at the time, all we had was mostly computer simulated data. We didn't have many testers at all, and large scale family research hadn't been done. And so I wanted to see if our family data, our true families, would share about the amounts of DNA that had been predicted through the academic work and through the computer simulations that 23andMe had done. For example, a second cousin was expected to share on average 3.125% of their DNA. And I wanted to see, is that what they would really share? Or would they be sharing more, less, how wide would the ranges be? And so I started testing my own family members and ended up with about 40 family members that I was comparing and finding really interesting things. Like some of my second cousins only shared 1% of their DNA, my DNA, and some of them shared up to 6%. And I was telling a scientist at 23andMe about this, and he said, that's really interesting. You should start a blog and share your research. And this was a wide open field. It was brand new then. And it wasn't something that the academics were spending as much time on. And the traditional science research community, they were very much focused on genetic health and medical risks. And so even though I didn't have a science background or a science degree, I was able to become known as an expert. And this blog was really the start of that. And I specifically said that it was written by a non-scientist for non-scientists. But I was so amazed when I started seeing my Google Analytics and seeing who was reading and quoting my blog. I had people from Stanford and Harvard and Oxford and Children's Cancer Centers of America. And this was really incredible to me and meaningful because I had been a very academically oriented student, but I had gone into the entertainment field. And so it was really nice to be recognized for my intelligence and my research and my brain. And that really fed me to keep going. Now, like Athina here, I organized an event back in 2013. It was the first ever standalone or genetic genealogy day. So it was DNA Day at Jamboree in Burbank. And there had been some company sponsored events, but this was the first time this was an independent event, not tied to any of the commercial DNA testing companies. And we were gonna have a whole day of genetic genealogy speeches. And now that sounds run of the mill, but then this was groundbreaking. Nobody had ever done this. And so I was in charge of getting all the speakers, and I went to my dream list and invited Dr. Spencer Wells, not expecting he would accept. And I also invited Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. from Finding Your Roots, which was my favorite TV show. And never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that both would accept. And Dr. Gates was our keynote luncheon speaker, and I got to meet him. And one of the scientists from 23andMe told him he should stay after lunch and watch my presentation. So he says he kept his car waiting. He sat through my hour presentation, and as soon as it was over, he sent someone to get me, and they said, Dr. Gates would like to speak to you privately. And I was ushered into a room to speak with him. And he said that he wanted to hire me as a full-time genetic genealogist on the TV show Finding Your Roots. And that was a dream come true. I had blogged about the series every episode in the first season, writing about the DNA that was used and how I thought it could have been used more. And he actually wasn't aware of that, but he loved what I did in my own research and in the speech that I gave that day. And he said he had been really wanting DNA to be a bigger part of the series. And so I was the first full-time genetic genealogist ever hired for a TV series. And I made it my goal to try to educate the public about the power of genetic genealogy. And this was an amazing opportunity to get these stories, these incredible stories that I had been finding in my own work and working with other people, into the homes of the American public. And I planned to only be behind the scenes, but I ended up being invited to come on the show and explain genetic genealogy to Dr. Gates on this show, but really for the benefit of the audience. And so that was very interesting because that's what I used to do, was be on camera. And I definitely didn't expect this new hobby, then avocation, and then profession to lead me back in front of the cameras. Shortly after 2013, when I joined Finding Your Roots full-time, I started the DNA Detectives, my company, but also a Facebook group. And the goal of this group was to reunite adoptees, people of unknown parentage for whatever reason, people whose families were separated through the Holocaust or through slavery, and try to reconstruct those family branches and reunite these long lost relatives with each other. It has turned out better than I ever could have imagined, like so many things in genetic genealogy and in my career. And just last week, we surpassed 150,000 members. And we have helped tens of thousands, if not 100,000 or more, people find their roots and find their family members for whom they were searching for, and help them learn more about long-held identity questions, and help to resolve those. And so this has been incredibly fulfilling and meaningful. Even if I didn't have the other parts of my career, this would be enough. If I'm ever in a bad mood, I can just log on to my Facebook page and go to the DNA Detectives group, and I see story after story after story of success. And this didn't come immediately. This took a lot of work, a lot of people working together, my amazing admin team and the search angels that help and guide a lot of these people to the resolution of their stories. I also started speaking and teaching a lot, which I love. I was even invited to be a keynote at Roots Tech, which is the biggest genealogy conference in the world, probably by far, and stand up on stage in front of thousands and thousands of people and talk about the power of genetic genealogy. And this was live streamed to 100,000 people or more. I ended up doing a lot more media as well, not just Finding Your Roots, but I was finding a lot of very interesting human interest stories through genetic genealogy and direct-to-consumer DNA testing. And I was invited to be on a lot of television shows and speak about these things. And I even ended up becoming an ABC News consultant through my genetic genealogy work. Now, when things really changed was National DNA Day, April 25th, 2018. That was the day genetic genealogy changed forever, and my life along with it. Does anyone know why? That was the day that the Golden State Killer suspect was arrested, that had been identified through genetic genealogy and through the techniques that I had developed for unknown parentage research. I actually didn't work on this case. I knew that genetic genealogy had the power to help solve cold cases and identify violent criminals and unidentified deceased individuals, often victims of violent crime. But I was still mulling over the ethics of doing so and wanted to make sure that all of the people that I had encouraged to participate in genetic genealogy were aware that their DNA could be used in this way. So I had been getting a lot of requests to work with law enforcement, but I had been holding off until this point. But after this, everybody learned that it was possible to use genetic genealogy to help resolve these violent crimes. And that was really what I was waiting for people to have the opportunity to decide whether they wanted their DNA used for this purpose. And in order to make that decision, you have to be aware that it can happen and is happening. And so the website that was used, GEDmatch, which I'll talk about a little more, put up a big banner saying law enforcement is using our database. If you're uncomfortable with this, then you can remove or privatize your DNA. And so that really opened the door for me to be able to responsibly help law enforcement without betraying my community. And so I decided to join forces with a company called Parabon Nanolabs that was doing really innovative work. And we formed the Parabon Snapshot Genetic Genealogy team. And I brought on a couple of my colleagues that had worked with me on other cases through DNA detectives and that had been doing this type of work with me for many years. And this is what happened.
The 32-year-old cold case thanks to new DNA technology, cracking a string of cold cases.
Officials say at least 4 more cold cases across the country have been solved. He was not on our radar. He was not on our list of suspects. We were out of it. And prosecutors are so confident in the science of their DNA sample, they say that the chances the killer is someone else are 1 in 200 octillion. It's an octillion. Exactly. When's the last time you've used that in a sentence? That's how confident they are. This is a turning point for crime solving in America.
If it hadn't been for genetic genealogy, we wouldn't be standing here today.
Make no mistake, DNA is what brings us into this room today.
So as Whit Johnson from ABC News said, this was a turning point for crime solving in America. And since we started this unit at Parabon, we have been responsible for helping with 140 cases where we were able to provide law enforcement the information that led to a positive identification in that case. The vast majority of these cases are suspect cases where we're trying to identify a violent criminal, murderer, or a rapist. Some of these were also unidentified victims who were deceased, but nobody knew their identities. And so in 29 months, a little over a year and a half, we've been successful in these 140 cases. These cases have involved over 175 known victims. Many of these people were serial murderers or serial rapists. And so there were often more than one victims in each of these crimes. And these are just some of the people who suffered at the hands of these violent criminals. And we were able to help bring resolution to their families. Now, this is really different than what I was doing before working with adoptees, because there are no happy endings. The damage is done. There's no way I can undo it. I can't bring closure to families and survivors of violent crimes. I can bring some answers and hopefully resolution. And in the best cases, I can help bring justice for them and their loved ones. These are some of the men that have been identified through investigative genetic genealogy. And my team alone has helped resolve over 2,000 years of cold case investigations, meaning these were 25, 35, 45 years old. And the law enforcement had been investigating them for all these years. And if you add up all of the ages of these cases and how long they had been investigated and how long law enforcement had been pouring resources into them, you get over 2,000 years that the power of genetic genealogy has been able to finally help resolve. So how did we get here? You know, it's a really unique story because, as I mentioned earlier, traditional science research and academics were not particularly interested in genetic genealogy. They were focused on other types of genetic research. And so to unlock the immense power of genetic genealogy, it relied on citizen scientists like myself. It was a grassroots effort. It was all volunteer for the first few years, and it was built through innovation and passion. This was something that we all felt so strongly about, and were so, that we felt was so full of potential that we were willing to pour our hearts, our minds, our blood, sweat, and tears into building genetic genealogy to its ultimate potential, which I don't think we've still reached. But this was unique. So we were allowed to kind of operate under the radar. There wasn't a lot of attention being paid to what we were doing from forensic scientists, from genetic researchers, and academia. And so we built this incredibly powerful tool, kind of without people realizing what was happening until the Golden State Killer suspect was identified and arrested. Now, in order to do this, we did need the basis of traditional science. We needed those brilliant scientists to advance genetic analysis to the point where we could really dig deeper into this DNA. And that took a process called SNP genotyping. And this is a picture of an Illumina SNP chip. And you put the DNA on that and it reads about, well, hundreds of thousands of markers. If you tested Ancestry DNA or 23andMe, it's about 700,000 markers. At Parabon, the chip that we use, analyzes 850,000 SNPs or genetic markers. And this is across the genome. Now, we're not looking at the entire genome, so we're not sequencing here, looking at 3 billion ATCs and Gs. We're looking at 850,000 pairs of that. And that gives us great power to be able to predict distant relationships and to use that data for our cases. Now, this is autosomal DNA. Originally in genetic genealogy, we only had Y DNA and mitochondrial DNA. And that was fascinating, but it was much more limited in what we could use it for. For women, we don't have a Y chromosome, so we had to get our dads or our brothers or our male cousins to test. And it was only informative of that father's 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 line. Or we could test our mitochondrial DNA, but it was only informative of our mother's 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 line. And both types of these types of DNA, they change very slowly. And so they're informative of deep ancestry. Autosomal DNA instead is inherited from all of our ancestral lines. Our great-grandparents pass it 50% from mom, 50% from dad to our grandparents. Our grandparents pass it to our parents, and our parents pass it to us. So it recombines at each generation. And that means that we're made up of little or big pieces of all of our great-grandparents' DNA and their parents and their parents. And so we have autosomal DNA from all of our third great-grandparents and most likely all of our fourth great-grandparents. And so this is a mixture of DNA that if we're able to identify where that DNA is coming from, we can reverse engineer someone's family tree from that. Now, in order to do this, we needed lots of DNA. We needed big data. And when I started, we just didn't have that. There were almost no testers in the database. And so one of my goals was to try to build these databases. And the best way to do that was to get the public's interest and show them the power of genetic genealogy. So I tried to do that through Finding Your Roots and through other media appearances and through my teaching. And then the companies started investing a lot of money in marketing Ancestry DNA and 23andMe primarily, and then later MyHeritage, that helped bring a lot of interest to this direct-to-consumer DNA testing. And so we ended up growing our databases significantly. And there are huge databases at Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, and even MyHeritage DNA, which came into the field later. But for law enforcement, we don't have access to these databases. Their terms of service prohibit law enforcement use. And so we spent all this time building these databases, but they weren't accessible for this application. And so what could we do? We also couldn't use the law enforcement databases. The CODIS database is federally owned. It has about 17 million profiles in it, but it is based on a totally different type of DNA testing. They use STR markers and we use SNPs, and they only test about 20 genetic markers typically. And so we couldn't use that for genetic genealogy. And so this was a long challenge. a longstanding challenge where lots of law enforcement had reached out to me over the years. And I explained to them that in order to be able to use genetic genealogy for their cold cases, there would have to be a way to get that crime scene DNA into databases or into the format, the SNP genotyping format, that would allow it to be viable for genetic genealogy. Well, the answer to this was really twofold, but part of it was GEDmatch. Two friends of mine, Curtis Rogers and John Olson, who were part of that original citizen scientist grassroots effort, started GEDmatch in order to have kind of a playground or a sandbox for genetic genealogists that were more advanced and very invested in researching. It offered tools that the companies didn't yet have, some more advanced techniques of comparison, and it also offered cross-company comparisons. So if you tested at 23andMe and I tested at Ancestry, we could both upload our raw data there and compare without having to buy another test. So they're not a DNA testing company. They're really a raw data repository. They have about 1.25 million genetic profiles, but as of May 2019, the only ones we can use in law enforcement matching are about 300,000 that have actively opted in and allowed their DNA to be used for this purpose. But back at the time the Golden State Killer suspect was arrested, the database was wide open for law enforcement to compare against the entire thing. Later on, Family Tree DNA also announced that they were allowing law enforcement to compare against their database. It's one of the smaller databases in the field, but it's still about 1.25 million genetic profiles. So it's very powerful for comparisons. And so we're able to use these two databases for law enforcement, cold cases, and violent criminals. So traditional genetic genealogy, the goal was always to identify the common ancestor that contributed that shared DNA. So when we started, we were using genetic genealogy to break through those genealogical brick walls that we all run into through the paper trail, where you just can't figure out who the parent was of your great-grandfather or your great-grandmother's maiden name that was lost to time. And so we were trying to use our own DNA and that of our family to break through those genealogical brick walls. Investigative genetic genealogy, what I'm doing with law enforcement, has a different goal, and that's to identify the contributor of that DNA. So instead of looking way far into the past and to our long dead ancestors, we're trying to identify who left that DNA at a crime scene or who this unidentified victim is. And that's a very different goal, and it means the techniques have to be different. So there's a specific set of skills from this, and it actually comes from unknown parentage DNA research, adoptees, donor conceived, people who take a DNA test and find out that their social father is not their genetic father, people who've grown up without one or both parents for whatever reason. And that's really what my focus has been on since about 2011. And so I had to kind of tweak the techniques that we were using for traditional genetic genealogy and find a way to make this work in the present. So we could identify first very recent ancestors and then living people and who contributed this DNA in very recent times. And so investigative genetic genealogy is using the exact same techniques that we developed for unknown parentage. Now, of course, you have to have solid genealogy skills. That goes without saying. You have to be able to build those trees and extend those trees you might find online in ancestry.com. And oftentimes you start with nothing. Sometimes you start with a stump. And so all genealogists are good at this. This is what we do, right? But for investigative genetic genealogy and unknown parentage research, you also have to be really good at descendancy research or reverse genealogy. And what this means is first you build backward in time, and then you've got to flip that tree upside down and build forward in time and try to find the descendants of those common ancestors. And so most traditional genealogists haven't spent a lot of time doing this, unless they were trying to find cousins, like I was actually early on, trying to find family heirlooms and family photos that didn't come down my particular line. And so early on, I had some practice at this without realizing how much it would benefit me later. and it's now a huge part of what I do. So most of my time is spent building trees, which is great because I love building trees. I could say I could build trees all day long, but I actually do. And as genealogists, you know that I'm using obituaries, I'm using census records and vital records, but I'm also using newspaper archives and articles. I'm using more recently developed records like social media to try to piece these families back together. I'm using a site called WikiTree. Anywhere I can find public trees where people have already entered some of their genealogy information gives me a head start. And I don't believe in source snobbery, meaning if I can get information somewhere, it's valuable to me. Even if it's not always right, it gives me a starting place. It often will give me very valuable hints, but I have to vet that information and make sure it's correct. And if it's not, I have to correct that research. But I couldn't do without the little tidbits and breadcrumbs that people leave me, non-professional genetic genealogists leave for me. And must-have resources for my work are ancestry.com, newspapers.com. Genealogy Bank has amazing obituaries. I use Find a Grave all the time, which is free. Google, just Googling names of ancestors and more recently living people can sometimes turn up interesting information. You just have to dig further back in the pages to find it sometimes. As I said, I use social media, Facebook, in order to try to piece these families back together and learn more about these living individuals. I use paid people search databases like White Pages, Premium, Ben Verified, Intellius, but a lot of those you can get quite a bit of information even without paying. So when I first started, I would just get as much information as I could for free before I really invested as much in what became my career. So it does cost some money. There is some investment, but there's also a lot you can find for free. And FamilySearch.org is a great example of that. That is a free site that has a tremendous amount of information in it. I also use MyHeritage, Classmates.com, newspaperarchive.com, newslibrary.com, Spokio, which is another people search database, WikiTree, as I mentioned. I use local newspaper archives and of course, court records. But you have to be open-minded and creative in order to find the puzzle pieces to get to the answers that we need. And so that means I'll use anything that I can get my hands on. I will search for hours and hours and hours for the tiniest bit of information to help me put these trees back together, reconstruct them going backward in time and forward in time, and try to help provide answers to individuals that have been waiting for these answers for years or decades in many cases. So as I said, you need those solid genealogy skills that you all are developing. You need the ability to identify matches. So on GEDmatch, for instance, people will often use an alias or a username or initials. I have to be able to figure out who that match is. And in law enforcement cases, that often means I need to do that without contacting them. So that takes a lot of detective work. You need to be very good at descendancy research or reverse genealogy to work on those types of cases. And what's challenging is there's still no credential or degree for this. You still cannot get a degree in what I do. And when I started, there were zero educational resources for this because it didn't exist. So I was fortunate enough to be part of developing the original coursework and classes and seminars for genetic genealogy, which I've really loved to do. But to this day, there's still no formal path to become a professional genetic genealogist. There's a lot more resources and education that one can get online and by attending seminars and institutes, but there's still no kind of plug-in way of doing it. There's no program you can just sign up for at college, with the exception of, I believe, BYU has a genetic genealogy program, I think now, but most colleges don't. And so this means you have to be like me still, and you have to blaze your own trail and figure out your own path to do this. Now, I've been so fortunate in my career to see incredible things and help so many wonderful people. And I've seen a lot of firsts. And one of those was the first investigative genetic genealogy conviction. So the first time that investigative genetic genealogy was used to identify a violent criminal where he pled guilty. So the Golden State Killer suspect was the first one identified, at least officially, but his trial and his court process was so complicated that one of the cases I worked early on was the first one to get an official conviction. And it was the April Tinsley case where a young girl was murdered in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I was able to help law enforcement identify John D. Miller, who pled guilty to murder and was sentenced to 80 years. I also was fortunate to be involved in the first investigative genetic genealogy case that ever received a conviction from a jury worldwide. And this happened in July 2019. It was my very first case with law enforcement. It was Tanya Van Kylenborg and Jay Cook, who were a young couple who lived in Canada, came down into Washington State to run some errands for Jay's father and were viciously murdered. So I was very proud to be able to help identify their killer through investigative genetic genealogy, and a jury weighed in and felt that the evidence was strong enough to convict him of 2 life sentences. Now, of course, my work is just a tip. I provide a tip to law enforcement, and then they have to do their traditional police work. But as I keep saying, genetic genealogy is powerful. So those tips we present to them are highly scientific tips and often highly confident, such as in this case. I was also involved in the first arrest in an active case where the suspect was identified through investigative genetic genealogy. This very forward-thinking detective, Josh Wilson out of St. George, Utah, heard about the Golden State Killer suspect case very early on when he was working this case, which was a sexual assault of a 79-year-old female. She was a beloved member of society, and she had been a teacher for decades there in St. George, Utah. And they wanted so badly to help identify her attacker. She had survived, but she had been beaten and raped. And they ran out of leads within 3 weeks. And so Detective Wilson reached out to me and we started investigative genetic genealogy. It was very different working on a brand new case, an active case. And it was a lot of pressure because I felt I needed to stop him before he victimized anyone else or escalated his crimes to murder or returned to Ms. Brooks, who's chosen to go public. And if you watched my show, you saw the story about this. I was able to narrow this down to 4 brothers through investigative genetic genealogy after he reached out to me. But we were very concerned he would go back to Carla's house and re-victimize her, and she was afraid to even sleep at night. So I stayed awake most of a weekend trying to narrow this down, and I was successful in doing that. And even the man who ended up being arrested and confessing said that being arrested was a miracle for him. And that's a strange statement, but it meant he didn't escalate and he didn't end up killing anyone. And he felt a lot of guilt about what he had done. And he was able to be forgiven, actually. Carla Brooks forgave him in open court, which is amazing. And he won't be in jail for the rest of his life because he was caught early. And that is the power of investigative genetic genealogy. What I'm probably most proud of is all the people that I have helped informally exonerate, all the people that had been under suspicion for violent crimes for years or decades. And because those cases weren't solved, that hung over their heads. But I had a very public exoneration, a formal exoneration of Christopher Tapp, who had been convicted of the murder and rape of Angie Dodge out in Idaho Falls, Idaho, in a 1998 murder. The victim's mother is the one hugging him there, and she had fought for Christopher Tapp because she didn't believe he was guilty, and she had helped get his rape conviction overturned, and he was released from prison after serving 20 years, but he still had his felony murder conviction hanging over his head, and I don't think we can imagine what it's like to try to live with that. And so because I was able to help them identify the true perpetrator through investigative genetic genealogy, the court officially vacated his murder conviction in July 2019. So there's a lot of focus on the arrests that happen in these cases, but I have to say the pinnacle of my career was helping to clear the name of an innocent man. So because of this immense power of genetic genealogy, we really have to use it responsibly and ethically. We can accomplish so much with it, but if it's used wrong, and if it's used in ways that aren't responsible, aren't ethical, and leave a bad impression with the public, it will slip out of our hands. Because this is a tool that absolutely relies on public trust and public participation. If people stop DNA testing, they stop participating in genetic genealogy, they refuse to opt into law enforcement matching in GEDmatch or family tree DNA, we won't be able to solve these crimes and bring answers to these families and the surviving victims. And so this has been really important to me. And this is why I waited as long as I did to help law enforcement. I do believe that everybody has the right to decide how their own DNA is used. And we don't need everyone to participate, but we do need, we do need a significant number of people that support what we do and are willing to trust us with their data. And so I'm a big proponent of, not just using genetic genealogy for, to solve one case. People will sometimes cut a corner or make a decision that is not as ethical because they want so badly to solve a case. But we can't put hundreds or thousands of eventually solved cases at risk just to have one case solved. So we have to play by the rules. We have to use the data that is opted in, where people have made that decision consciously to allow us to use their data. And we have to be very careful about the way investigative genetic genealogy is used and presented to the public. So what is the future? Well, as long as we use this tool responsibly and wisely and ethically, there will be thousands and thousands of violent crimes that will be resolved thanks to this and through these methods. There are also about 40,000 unidentified deceased people across the country that we can help identify. But like I said, we have to protect this tool and make sure that the way we're using it is in line with the consent that we've received from the people who own their own DNA. What's next for me? Well, I think I've kind of hit the pinnacle of my career when I found out there was a meme that included me. So a couple months ago, this started circulating and I thought, wow, I could never have imagined that I would end up being part of a meme. So I'm not sure how much higher I can go or how much more I can accomplish, but the future for you all is unimaginable. So I want you to imagine the unimaginable. I could never have foreseen what would happen for me and what my career would bring by following my passion and being willing to really spend time. And, I made a lot of sacrifices of my own time and spending time with my family because I believed in this so much and I really thought we could help people with it. And so I want to encourage you all to follow your passion. And I know it sounds like, oh, trite saying. And I have to admit, I felt that way before this happened to me. I didn't find this career till I was in my 40s. And so I want you to know that you should never let anyone tell you that you can't change your path, that it's too late to accomplish something. I had a whole other 2 careers before I got involved in this: musical theater and modeling. Who would have ever thought that that would eventually lead me here? I don't think anyone could have imagined it. And it hasn't always been easy, that's for sure. But I've been willing to put in the time and the dedication. And I care so much about the work that I do that I've been able to be successful in ways I could never have imagined. And so I want you all to be inspired by my story. I didn't go down the right path at first. I didn't study science, although I was tempted to. I really was drawn toward singing and performing and being on stage. And so that's what I ended up spending the first half of my life pursuing. And it wasn't as meaningful for me. And I wasn't as successful at that. But then I found something else much later in life when a lot of people think their life is practically over. You know, a lot of women will take time off their careers and raise children and feel like maybe there isn't a lot left for them career-wise. And women might also be in unfulfilling jobs or careers, but feel like it's too late to change. And so I want you all to remember that, you know, when you go to college, changing your major is nothing. Like it feels like so much of the time, and I went through that. But you have so much time. Even if you study one thing, it doesn't mean you can't do something else later in life. I don't think anyone is a better example of that than I am. So thank you so much for having me today. It's been really fun to talk about all this, a little different than my normal focus when I present. I have a couple websites, thednadetectives.com. I4GG is my Institute for Genetic Genealogy. I give an annual conference that Leonard, my husband, and I plan. We are gonna have to do it virtual like everybody else. So if you're interested in that, just keep watch on our website. We'll update it when we have plans together. And if you're on Facebook, that's where I spend the majority of my social media time. I guess I'm a little behind the times compared to some of you. But if you want to follow me there, I have a public page, CeCe Moore, genetic genealogist, and I post a lot of news stories about cases I've worked on and other things that are in relation to genetic genealogy. So hopefully we'll stay in touch. And I am ready for questions whenever you are. I think I'll escape out of this. All right.
Okay, so now just some time for some questions. Thank you so much for presenting. It was a wonderful presentation, so eye-opening. Okay, so we already have 9 questions in the chat, the Q&A. So the first one is the recent arrest of the Golden State Killer combining DNA research and geospatial technology? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Signal the way law enforcement is headed. The case dependent on voluntary shared genetic information.
Yes, so it's dependent on 2 things. The first is getting that crime scene into the right format to be viable for genetic genealogy. And you either do that through SNP genotyping, like I talked about, or you can do full sequencing of the genome and then extract those genetic markers that we use for genetic genealogy typically. What you have to create is a file that resembles the file you would get if you tested at Ancestry DNA or 23andMe. And so that is how Barbara Ray Venter was able to help law enforcement identify D'Angelo. I'm not sure who decided which way they would analyze the DNA, but ultimately they got that file and they uploaded it to GEDmatch, and then they performed genetic genealogy on it, just like you would for an adopted person. And at the time, let me add that nobody knew that law enforcement was using GEDmatch, which was my hesitation. And so they were able to compare against about 800,000 participants that were in that database. It's a much smaller database. It's usually people that are more serious about genetic genealogy, but they still were able to find a third cousin and some other cousins that eventually led them to his identity. But from my understanding, it was not an easy case. There were no close relatives whatsoever in that database.
Thank you. That was a wonderful response. Okay, so another question is, do you think there could be any dangers to government/law enforcement having access to our DNA information?
It depends what you consider risks. Could one of your family members be identified as a criminal? Certainly. And I talk about this a lot. A lot of media brings this up to me because people are concerned about being genetic informants on their own family. But my argument is that the vast majority of victims of violent crime are victimized by someone close to them, their own family members. And so if we have someone in our families or our extended families even that is capable of those types of activities, we really need to get them away from our family members. Do you want them around your children? Do you want them around your nieces, nephews, your grandparents? Do you want them to have access to your family? So as difficult as it might be, if someone in your own family, even extended family, even a first cousin once removed that you might have grown up with, was identified because you contributed your DNA to GEDmatch, we still have to look at what that means in reality. And what that means is that person deserved to be found out. It's not your fault. And that's another thing I want to emphasize is I'm always asked, what's the one match that solved a case? And it's never one match. It never should be one match. The matches need to be presenting a picture, and it can't rely on one person. So it's never going to be just one person who led to the identification. You know, we're hoping we're going to have people who match on different branches of the family tree, hopefully all 4 grandparents' lines. And so I'm usually working with a dozen matches or 20 matches, and it's not just one. Now, we're doing all that we can to protect the identity of those matches. When we first started, there were some missteps where the media got a hold of some affidavits and reports, and the names of some of the relatives that were the matches in the databases did get released. Fortunately, those people were okay with it. But I think that's a bigger risk, is having your name get out there. But we've taken great steps since the beginning of this to protect those matches, and everyone's much more aware of the potential issues with that. But we were really learning as we went. You know, it just exploded, and law enforcement wasn't used to using this tool, and nobody was totally clear on the best way to handle this very sensitive information. And so now, you know, we don't include any identifying information of the matches in our reports. We warn the detectives to be very careful about what gets released to the media. In some states, like Florida, for instance, there's a sunshine law. And if you email about something with someone who works for the Florida government, that's discoverable. And so we're all very aware of what could be discoverable and what isn't, because we want to protect these people. So I don't think there's any real risks unless you're a violent criminal yourself. It's not going to negatively impact your life as long as everyone handles this data and this information responsibly. And I've been a big proponent for best practices. And because I worked with sensitive information of the guests on Finding Your Roots all these years, celebrities' DNA, I have hundreds of celebrity DNA profiles that I manage. And because I've worked with so many other sensitive family situations with adoption and unknown parentage, I was already coming into this aware of those types of risks and those types of sensitivities. So I don't think anyone can ever say there's zero risk of some negative repercussion, but the greater good in this case far outweighs it. And there's always a lot of fear mongering that goes on and sensationalizing. And so I think the risks have been way over exaggerated and hyped up and focused on when they're really very, very small. Unless you're a violent criminal, and then they are not small, because we're gonna find you.
You definitely will. Okay, so thank you so much for answering that question. So another question we have in the Q&A is, what do you think DNA research would look like in the next 5, 10, 20 years?
You know, it's funny because in my speeches, I've always talked about the future of genetic genealogy, but even I couldn't have come close to predicting what we would be doing today when I started speaking 10 years ago and teaching about this. So I think it's impossible to know what we'll be doing, but I do think there will be great strides in medical research. I'm really hoping that geneticists and genetic researchers are understanding more how valuable our genealogical pedigrees are in relation to their research. And I was the lead ancestry ambassador at 23andMe for many years. And my team worked so hard to try to convince them of this, that genealogists are so valuable to medical research. And I think that's finally being recognized. We, you know, trace traits through our families, right? We have access to death records. A lot of us know so much about the medical traits and conditions throughout our family. And by providing that information to researchers, allowing them to access that, as Ancestry.com is starting to go toward, I think a lot can be accomplished. I also think, you know, there's going to be no such thing as anonymous birth parents or donors. Donor conception, it's already not anonymous. Anyone who thinks they're not going to be identified needs to think again. Violent crimes, anytime you leave behind your DNA, which in those types of personal crimes, it's almost impossible not to leave your DNA behind. None of that will be anonymous anymore as we go forward. And I think we'll see a lot of improvement in predicting traits. The company I work with, Parabon, is a pioneer in predicting what someone might look like from their DNA. So I think we'll see a lot of research in that area, and that's going to just improve more and more. So we're all going to be able to find amazing things about our own personal history and mysteries, but also historical mysteries. A lot of those will be resolved over time if they involve DNA or family history. It's going to keep being exciting. I'll tell you, every day of my life has been exciting for 10 years, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon.
That's wonderful. That's good to hear. Okay, so another question is, lots of cases seem to have DNA analysis issues. So do you think loss of evidence, that issue would be improved in later years?
You know, it really relies on the original crime scene investigators. And many of these cases happened before they even understood DNA. So I'm always amazed when we have DNA we can work with from the 60s or the 70s or even the 80s. It's amazing what a great job they did without possibly knowing how important that evidence could be one day. But unfortunately, there are a lot of cases where that didn't happen for whatever reason, or they did collect the DNA and it's been destroyed or lost. I hear from a lot of family members, a lot of victims of sexual assaults that are so excited and hopeful about this idea of investigative genetic genealogy. And it's heartbreaking to find out there's no DNA remaining on that case. It could have all been consumed in earlier testing. Sometimes there's fires or floods, things have been lost. There was the lack of knowledge that has sometimes led to not having that evidence collected from the beginning. And so we can't work every case, unfortunately. Some are highly degraded, but we've had a lot of success, surprisingly, with those cases. We deal with mixtures, as you can imagine. A lot of times there's a mixture of the victim's DNA and the perpetrator's DNA, but we also have developed algorithms, and we have amazing bioinformaticists at Parabon and other parts of this field. I actually work with Dr. Ellen Graytack, and she went to Harvard, got her PhD. So unlike me, she went that traditional route and studied genetics. And she's a wonderful partner in this because she's so good at dealing with the degraded DNA, the mixtures. And so if there is DNA available, we can often make the most of it. And it only has to be a very, very tiny amount. So that's going to continue. We'll find better and more improved ways of dealing with that. And we'll need less and less and less DNA as time goes on.
Thank you for answering that question. Great answer, by the way. So what advice would you give to someone who's interested in becoming a genetic genealogist?
Well, like I said, it's still not a direct road. It's still not just a plug and play where you can major in that and then go into a career. You really have to be a self-starter. You have to be motivated to seek out the best educational, unconventional resources. And that's not easy. So we have a really active online community, and we always have. Genetic genealogy has always been happening on mailing lists and now on social media, mostly Facebook groups. And so if someone's really interested in that, I encourage them to get involved in those early. You can learn a tremendous amount. Remember, I'm totally self-taught. Everything I learned was from engaging with the community and doing my own research, testing myself, testing my family members, and then helping other people with their research. And you want to branch out and work with people's DNA from different ancestral origins. I've been so fortunate on Finding Your Roots that we purposely try to get guests from diverse origins. And so I get the opportunity to work on DNA from all over the world. And so I would strongly recommend doing that. I also believe strongly in volunteerism. You know, I would never have gotten where I am. Genetic genealogy would never have gotten where it was without the early adopters who were willing to pour tens of thousands of volunteer hours into it. I think that's lost a lot. So it's still not easy. So if you want something easy, If you need a lot of structure and you need other people to motivate you, it's probably not the right thing for you, because we're not there yet where you can just go get that credential, get that degree, and then immediately get a job. You're still going to have to be creative. But I'm not meaning to discourage anyone, because it is definitely possible. And I am proof of that more than anyone, because it didn't even exist. And like I said, I was the first to ever call myself a professional genetic genealogist. Only Roberta Estes was working, she's another genetic genealogist who has a very successful blog now. She was working with Family Tree DNA. So this was a career for her, but she hadn't called herself a professional genetic genealogist yet. So I had to really go out on the limb and put that on my blog and say, you know, I'm a professional, when there was no such thing. And so if I can do it when there was nothing, nothing to get started, then all of you certainly can. But you are going to have to be proactive. Again, I encourage you to interact with our groups. We've really moved away from mailing lists, and most of the learning in genetic genealogy is happening on Facebook now. But there are some great webinars out there. We have our videos on I4GG, but there's a lot of free resources out there as well. If you're interested in helping adoptees and people of unknown parentage, that's the best training ground for what I do. And so being in DNA detectives and learning how to do that, and then eventually volunteering to help others, being a search angel or a volunteer DNA detective, is a wonderful way to start. And that's how everyone that I work with got started. So long answer, but that's because there's no easy answer to that.
I know your story is really inspiring story, and you really had to be creative with your angles. So which case of yours resonated with you the most?
You know, all of my cases are so important to me because I know how important they are to the families and the surviving victims. It's often the most important thing of their lives. And so it all really matters to me as well. But I think I mentioned really the pinnacle of my career was the Angie Dodge case so far, because not only did I help find the man responsible for the murder and rape, but I helped clear an innocent man's name, and he finally got that burden of suspicion lifted off his shoulders. And there were a lot of people who still thought he was guilty. And so we were able to help him clear his name once and for all. And that was a formal exoneration. But I quickly mentioned also that there are thousands and thousands of informal exonerations. There are, in every case I work, there are people that have been under suspicion for years or decades that have never been able to fully clear their name because the true perpetrator wasn't identified. And so although a lot of the focus is on the arrests, I'm most proud of these thousands of people that have finally had that burden of suspicion lifted from their shoulders because we were able to use investigative genetic genealogy to find the person that was truly responsible for that. And so there's also a case in South Carolina where a teenage girl was murdered, and her sister had been blamed by the community for decades. And I can hardly imagine something more awful. And so being able to help find the true killer, although he was dead, but to finally have that resolution, she's told me, you know, has meant so much for her to be able to finally prove that she had nothing to do with her sister's death. So those are the ones that really resonate with me.
Such a great story. Thank you so much. So while working on your cases, when you finally figure out the suspect, what goes through your mind at that exact moment?
You know, it's so hard to put into words. I've been putting these puzzle pieces together for adoptees for, you know, a long time, almost a decade now. And there's a real satisfaction to when all those puzzle pieces finally come together after hours and hours and hours of tree building backward and forward, looking for those intersections and those commonalities, trying to find those triangulations that'll finally lead to that identification of whomever I'm trying to identify. And so that's a wonderful feeling when it's in an unknown parentage case or when it's involving someone's identity mystery. So I would often do my genealogy dance, right? Nikki can attest to that. I would get so excited, but it's such a different thing, even though it's the exact same techniques, when it finally leads to the name of someone that killed somebody or raped somebody. And I'm the only person that has that knowledge in the world, except for that suspect, presumably if they didn't tell anyone, it's heavy. You know, it feels good getting the puzzle pieces to finally click in place, but it's a very heavy burden. And I quickly want to get that name over to law enforcement so it's their burden, so I can pass that responsibility. I think, what if I had a heart attack right now? Or what if, you know, something happened and I haven't communicated this? So I'm always very quick to want to tell them about it, but I have to write a big report about how I got to that conclusion. And that often takes me 10 hours. So I'll stay up all night because I just want to get the information out of my lap and into somebody else's. So it's a much more bittersweet feeling. The other aspect is that when I research these people, I'm digging deep and I'm getting to know their families. I know their family trees inside and out. I've often looked at their families on social media, and I care about all families. And so although I'm doing this to bring answers to the victims' families and the surviving victims, I still care about the perpetrators' families as well. And so I know that my discovery is going to have a very negative impact on those people as well. And the vast majority of the time, they are, you know, completely innocent, unless they're parents who abused their child and caused them to go down this wrong road. I know they're fully innocent. And so I often feel very bad for what their next few months or years are going to be like.
Thank you so much for answering the question. So we have a lot of questions. Okay, so one of them is, as high schoolers, if we want to pursue a career in investigative genealogy / genetic genealogy, what should our next steps look like for college majors, etc.?
So it depends what you've done so far, but first is getting those solid genealogy skills. Make sure you are really good at documenting your work, making sure that you know, you're going the right direction on the trees, because if you go up the wrong branch, if you bark up the wrong branch, right, you're never gonna get anywhere. And so that's the basis of all of this. And then you should start practicing that reverse genealogy or descendancy research if you haven't done that. Try to trace all your cousins. And I just so happened to do that, as I quickly mentioned, because my family, my immediate family, didn't inherit a lot of family photos. And I was really interested in antique family photos before I got involved in DNA. And so I wanted to find pictures of all my ancestors. In order to do that, I went up the tree and down the tree and contacted all my cousins. So when genetic genealogy came around, I already knew all these second cousins and third cousins, and I was able to ask them to take DNA tests for me. So it's really important to develop that skill. Also start practicing finding things online for free, like I mentioned. Like Intellius, these people search databases often will give a certain amount of information for free. So if you're reading a news article, say, try to see if you can build that person's family tree. I know it sounds silly, but I've done this so many times where I'm reading an interesting article and I'm like, hey, let's see if I can trace that person's family backwards and forwards. And you can first do that for yourself, but then just try and practice on other people. And like I said, if you're on Facebook, or even if you're not, I encourage you to join just to be part of our community, and you can learn from watching. And then over time, you should start volunteering to help others, because I never think you should, this isn't a career where you should start charging right away. You really have to do volunteer work first. And the best way to do that is to volunteer and help others out there so you can work with varied DNA. As far as majors, history is a great major for it. Certainly genetics, but you don't have to delve too deeply into genetics to be able to do genetic genealogy. So if you don't love science and math, you shouldn't let that intimidate you either, because as long as you understand the basic concepts, you can go a long way. Now, if you want to get really advanced eventually, then you do have to understand more of the underlying science, but you don't have to delve as deeply into it as you might imagine. So I think you could study almost anything and yet still, like I did, end up in genetic genealogy. But until there are some really solid, good courses where you can get a whole degree in it, you got to create your own education, as I've said multiple times. And so my best advice is just to get involved in the people that are doing this every day. In fact, I have a short story. There's a young man that was in college who showed up at Roots Tech, which is our biggest conference. And he followed me around and one of my colleagues all day, and he was great. His name is Paul Woodbury, and he wanted to be a genetic genealogist. And he was going to BYU, where they actually do have genealogy degrees and even genetic genealogy coursework, which is very unusual. But because they're so focused on genealogy there, he had that opportunity. And now he's the head genetic genealogist for Legacy Tree genealogists. And he's a teacher. He's taught courses with me. He's now taught his own courses. And so he just tried to get to know the people that were the early adopters in this, that were doing the work in this. And he immersed himself in it. And he ended up writing the chapter in the textbook on genetic genealogy for BYU as well. So he's incredible, but he's a really good example of just finding a way to do this. And now this is what he does for his career.
All right, thank you so much. So I guess just staying on this topic, is there, do you think like in 5 years time, there would be a course that you can take, or is there anything available now?
I do think that there will be. And as I said, we operated under the radar for a long time without a lot of interest from academia. But now that we're helping law enforcement, there is much more attention and interest in this. And there are so many people looking for educational resources. I receive emails every day, multiple times a day, asking me how someone can learn how to do this. And so there is that need and demand for it now. So you know that that means these resources will be developed, and they are already being developed. But you have to be careful too, because I've started to see some courses being offered by people that aren't truly experts. You know, it is a big learning curve, but because most of us who did this don't have PhDs, and we might not even have science degrees like me, we're not the ones that are involved in creating these college courses. And I think that's a mistake. I think you need to double check, even if there is an offering, or even if there becomes a degree or certificate course, and make sure that the people involved in that really are the experts in this field, because there's going to be a lot more experts as time goes on, but we're not there yet. You know, it's going to take more time. It's only been 2.5 years since the Golden State Killer suspect was arrested. And so it takes longer than that to get really, really skilled at this.
Great answer, thank you. And I know there are a lot of high schoolers that are joining us today, so this information is really, really valuable.
I wish I had an easy answer for you all, but as I keep saying, I don't. But you can do it. You're just gonna have to be a little creative and work hard to find those educational resources that fit with your interests.
Definitely. Genealogy careers are not that easy. So how do you deal with disappointments along the way when you're through your findings? Because there's some that are very shocking and some that are not so shocking.
I think in order to do what I do, you have to be really emotionally stable and strong, because you do find so many horrible, sad stories. And that was true even before I worked with law enforcement. There are a lot of skeletons in families' closets, and genetic genealogy is bringing those out. And we really have opened Pandora's box. And I think that it would be easy to get too emotionally pulled into that. And if you tend to have depression issues, I think it'd be tough, particularly law enforcement work. I read about murders and rapes all day long now, you know, and I think I just happen to have the right personality for it. And I have a wonderful family around me that helps keep me uplifted and supported. But I do think it's something you have to think about if you're interested in this career. Will you be negatively impacted by being bombarded by all of this sadness and tragedy? And if so, the law enforcement aspect of it is probably not the best for you. And it's probably better to focus on being a professional genealogist, tracing family trees. You can work with adoptees. You'll still run into some sad stories, but it will be much more positive. And like I said in my talk, you know, what I do now, there's no happy endings because it can't be undone. But what I used to do was full of happy beginnings. And so there are other paths you can take that you can still work in this field, but you do need to consider your personality and your, I don't know how to say this, your emotional stability and well-being. And also, you know, security, right? If you are out there chasing after criminals from your laptop out there, you know, there are some security potential risks that you also need to keep in mind. Most people aren't going to do it as publicly as I do, so hopefully it won't be as risky. And with more and more of us doing it, it's less risky. But you know, when I first started this, it was definitely something we had to consider, and it's why Barbara Venter didn't go public for months, because she was worried about her security. And so there's a lot to think about. It's not all just fun and games, right? This really is a heavy field to be in, and I think it's something that someone who would also be a good therapist, a good counselor, is well suited for. And we need, that's another thing you all could consider, is we desperately need therapists who are focused on unexpected surprises from direct-to-consumer DNA testing, adoption, family reunions, and maybe even dealing with the fallout of, you know, families who find out through genetic genealogy that their family members have some big secrets. And we just don't have enough therapists that are focused on that. And I also think genetic counseling is a fantastic career for somebody interested in this field, because it's becoming more and more used in conjunction with genetic genealogy. They used to be very separate, but they are becoming much more conjoined, basically, in what they're doing. And so there are not nearly enough genetic counselors in the United States. There's a huge need for those. And that is one where you can go get your degree. So if you need more structure, you need to just have a program laid out for you, that's a really good option for you.
Extremely helpful. Thank you. That was very, very helpful. So I think one question that I see coming up everywhere is, do you plan to work on the John Benet Ramsey case?
So all of my cases depend on the agency asking me to work on it and giving me access to that DNA, that crime sample DNA. And they haven't asked me to. So of course I would want to if they asked me, but sometimes I do think there's too much emphasis on her case versus some other cases. And so a lot of times I'm more focused on a case that gets less media and less attention. There's a lot of victims of color and from lower socioeconomic status that get zero media. So I will say that I sometimes prefer to focus on those cases that I feel like haven't gotten the attention that they deserve, and the families that haven't had the type of opportunities to get resolution. So as much as I would love to work on that case, it's obviously a fascinating case, it's high profile, I feel just as strongly about my cases that nobody's heard of except for the families and the loved ones.
That's good to know. I mean, it's been a case for a while now, and some people really wish it would get solved, but there are other cases that are still out.
And, you know, relies on two things. One, the agency asking me to work on it, but two, is there viable DNA? And we don't really know that about that case. There's a lot of speculation, but we don't know for a fact that there is DNA that genetic genealogy could be performed on. And that's true in a lot of high profile cases, Zodiac, the Delphi murders, you know, only insiders know if there is DNA from that perpetrator or not. There can be DNA at crime scenes that isn't from the perpetrator. You know, it doesn't automatically mean you're guilty because your DNA is found there. And so in some cases that I've been involved in over the years now, we identify the contributor of that DNA, but they're ruled out. And so I'm glad it's not a rush to justice. You know, we provide that tip, that potential identification, but then law enforcement, it's their job to determine, is this a real person of interest in this case, or could their DNA have been there for another reason? And so I think that's always going to come into play too. Some of these cases we really want solved may have some DNA, but it's not necessarily the perpetrator's DNA.
That's very interesting. And there's so many factors that play into each of these. So in one of your episodes, this is just a question that I have personally. In one of your episodes, you were seen breaking the news to detectives, and I believe it was the Angie Dodge case. I could be wrong. But how did you feel being the only one in that room, the only female in that room, and knowing the most powerful information?
You know, it is interesting because law enforcement still is male dominated. There's a lot of terrific female detectives, but still it's, you know, male dominated without a doubt. And I already had dealt with this credibility issue in my career because I don't have a science degree and I don't have a PhD in genetics. And I was often ending up on the stage on a panel or presenting with a bunch of PhDs and a bunch of people who had gone that traditional route. And so fortunately, I have some experience with what that is like. And it's now I'm back there again, this time having to prove myself to law enforcement. And I have to say, they've been really wonderful. You know, I wasn't sure what it would be like. And you never want to step on their toes. Like, they've been working on these cases sometimes for decades. It's been in the department for all these years. It's been the case of a lifetime for a lot of these detectives, they tell me. Like, it's the one case they want solved before they retire or before they pass away. And so I never forget how much they have invested in it. I may swoop in and be able to identify the person in a couple of days or a few hours, but I never take away the credit from them because they have spent so much time and invested so many resources and so much care in these cases that in the end, it's still there. The credit still goes to them. And if they weren't willing to embrace these new techniques and trust me and Parabon to work on these cases, they wouldn't be solved. And so I think you have to tread carefully. You don't just like swoop in, take over the case, tell them what to do. And so I am really careful about the way I present the information. And I never want to tell them what to do with their own case, right? So I just present what I have and what I have found. I try to impress upon them how confident the information is, or if it's not that confident and we need to follow up. And they've been really great about embracing me and my team and trusting us. And, you know, it's amazing as a non-law enforcement person who has no background in that to be embraced and trusted by these incredible detectives and agencies. So it's, you know, it's an amazing thing. And it's an amazing thing to be a woman in my 50s now, again, embarking on something new and exciting and having success at it.
Thank you so much. There was so much information shared today, and that was a wonderful answer. So very important presentations from both speakers, but I just have one last question for both of you. How would you encourage high schoolers to explore genealogy? And I don't know who wants to go first.
I'll let him go first. The doctor go first. I've talked a lot, so it's his turn.
No. I've been listening and yeah, I mean, I think this question came up. What I loved about CeCe's experience is the self-starting part of it. I think, you know, that's the thing. Even though I'm an academic, right? I think that lesson is one that I've used as well. So I didn't get into finding your roots because there was a pathway to it. I got into finding your roots, the Seedlings, because I talked to people and I inquired and I looked under some rocks and Google. So I think that attitude really is the most important thing, more so than any degree program currently. So I think that curiosity. That said, I think we've talked a little bit. I think, you know, in my case, the sciences, and particularly the quantitative sciences early, so you understand you're not afraid of statistics and computer science. So I kind of articulated that a little earlier, so I won't say that again. But I really echo what CeCe had said earlier, but I'll let you go.
You know, I'll co-opt Diane Southard's experience here in the story that she tells. Hopefully she won't mind, but she's another professional genetic genealogist, and she got involved at the very, very ground floor. And she tells a story that I think it was one of her teachers in high school who told her, when you get to college, find something you're interested in. Find a professor that you're interested in his work and volunteer and get involved in his research. And she did that. When she got to college, at BYU, she looked at the board of all of the postings and she found one that interested her and went and volunteered to help with that research. And that turned into the Sorensen Molecular Genealogy Foundation. and then a company called Gene Tree. And so she got involved in genetic genealogy at the ground floor. And that was because of that advice. And so it's exactly what you're saying, Brandon, that you have to seek it out, no matter how you approach this. Even if you do have a degree, she was a biology major, I believe. And genetic genealogy, you know, wasn't something she even knew to pursue, but she found it because of that. And so I've talked a lot about myself. I wanted to bring her into it as well. And then we have people like Blaine Bettinger, who did major in biochemistry, and he did get his PhD in that, but I've taught with him a lot, and we've been good friends over the years. And he's told me that, you know, he had to really think outside the box, because wasn't part of what he learned in school. And he had to think more creatively and open his mind to different applications of what he had learned in school. So it's a great foundation, but you do really have to seek out that which you're passionate about.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for both answering that question. And thank you so much for your time. I know we're running a little bit over, but I just also wanted to say on the behalf of the NEST+m Genealogy Club, thank you so much for coming to speak today. It really was both of your talks were really, really informative. So I just want to share.
Athina.
Oh, thank you. It was all thanks to me and my co-founder. I mean, this club is basically my life now, and we love it so much. So I just wanted to share a couple of helpful links. So this is the link for the Finding Your Roots classroom. I definitely suggest you check it out. It has the series, the curriculum, and at-home materials if you want to bring it into your classroom or high school club. So definitely take a screenshot of this slide and the next slide that I will present. So you take a screenshot, I'll leave it up for like a minute. I just don't want to run a little bit too much over. Okay, so here's the next slide that you can take a screenshot of. It has all the links it has our website, stuff for Finding Your Roots for Miss CeCe Moore, Dr. Brandon Ogbunu, and 2 of the guest mentors from Finding Your Roots, the Seedlings, Tina Lasisi and Lindsay Fulton. Again, a huge thank you to them. I know we answered a lot of questions today. I will be sending out a feedback form after the webinar. So if you had any remaining questions, I will definitely take them from there and then send it to the speakers after. So thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much for participating in the chat. So thank you, and hope to see you next time for our next idea.
Thank you so much, Athina.
Congratulations.
Thank you for joining us. This was really great.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
And Athina, you're answering that last question yourself, leading by example, starting clubs, surrounding it with people, you know, interested in this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. All right. Bye-bye, everybody.